Something unprecedented may already be happening between the United States and Canada, and Washington may be losing control of the fallout. American wine exports are collapsing, whiskey producers are getting hammered, Canadian consumers are boycotting U.S. products in massive numbers. And now Canada may be preparing an even bigger move that could reshape North American energy power for decades. What started as a tariff dispute is rapidly evolving into something much deeper involving trade, oil, manufacturing, and geopolitical leverage. Welcome back to your ultimate pit stop, Piston Pundit. And the deeper this situation goes, the more it looks like Canada is quietly preparing for a future far less dependent on the United States altogether. The consumer revolt Washington never anticipated. What makes this trade conflict so unusual is that it didn't begin as a traditional embargo or government-controlled sanction. Instead, it evolved into something far more unpredictable, a nationwide consumer-driven boycott that spread rapidly across Canada. And now the financial damage is becoming severe enough that even major American industries are sounding the alarm. According to the Wine Institute, U.S. wine exports to Canada collapsed by roughly 78% during 2025, plunging from around $460 million down to just $103 million. That staggering $357 million drop reportedly represented more than 80% of total global losses for American wine exports. Canada had long been America's largest foreign wine market, making the sudden decline even more shocking for producers already facing slowing global demand. The whiskey industry suffered even harder impacts. U.S. spirits exports to Canada reportedly fell around 85% during the second quarter of 2025, hammering companies deeply tied to bourbon country and American distilling culture. Distilleries across Kentucky and other manufacturing-heavy regions are now beginning to feel the pressure from weakening international demand and growing uncertainty surrounding future trade stability. But collapsing alcohol exports are only one side of the story. Behind the scenes, the political rhetoric between Washington and Ottawa has started escalating into something far more serious. Trump's trade pressure starts triggering blowback. The political rhetoric surrounding the dispute only intensified tensions further. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer publicly grouped Canada alongside China as one of the only countries actively retaliating economically against the United States. That comparison alone marked a dramatic deterioration in relations between two nations that historically described themselves as inseparable trading partners. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick criticized Canada's refusal to stock American liquor products, while enforcement threats from Washington started growing louder. But instead of pressuring Canada into backing down, the aggressive tone appears to have hardened Canadian resistance even further. Prime Minister Mark Carney responded firmly, insisting Canada would not negotiate from a position of weakness. Meanwhile, provincial leaders continued linking any restoration of American alcohol sales to broader tariff disputes affecting automotive manufacturing and industrial jobs. Ontario Premier Doug Ford made it clear that unresolved auto sector tensions remain a major obstacle. And that's where this becomes especially dangerous for Washington. Governments can negotiate tariffs, but they cannot easily reverse consumer sentiment once national identity becomes attached to purchasing behavior. Once public perception shifts, rebuilding trust can take years. And while Washington remains focused on tariffs and consumer boycotts, Canada may already be preparing a much bigger long-term strategic pivot involving global energy markets. Canada's energy expansion could rewire North America. While headlines focused on collapsing whiskey and wine exports, Canada quietly began discussing something potentially far bigger. A new pipeline system capable of moving roughly 1 million barrels of oil per day toward Asian markets. After the Trans Mountain expansion boosted exports through Vancouver, Canada gained far greater leverage in global energy markets, especially as China increased purchases of Canadian crude. That shift matters because American refiners long depended on discounted Canadian heavy oil flowing almost exclusively south. But now, Canada increasingly appears determined to compete globally instead of remaining America's discounted supplier. As Middle East instability continues disrupting energy markets, Canadian crude is becoming more strategically valuable worldwide. And if another Pacific pipeline eventually moves forward, Washington could lose part of the pricing advantage U.S. refiners benefited from for decades. Every redirected barrel potentially strengthens Canada's bargaining power while weakening America's historical leverage over North American energy pricing. But energy is only one piece of a much larger transformation quietly unfolding beneath the surface of this trade conflict. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this deep dive into the automotive industry, trade shifts, and geopolitical changes reshaping North America, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to Piston Pundit so you don't miss our upcoming vehicle updates and industry breakdowns. The quiet economic realignment already taking shape. What makes this story so important is that none of these developments exist in isolation anymore. The alcohol boycott, pipeline expansion discussions, worsening trade rhetoric, and Canada's broader diversification strategy are all connected pieces of a much larger geopolitical shift. For decades, the United States held enormous leverage because Canada relied heavily on American infrastructure, consumers, and refining capacity. But rising tariffs and political pressure appear to be accelerating Canada's push towards stronger ties with Asia and Europe instead. Meanwhile, American industries are already feeling consequences. Distilleries are slowing production, wineries are losing critical export markets, and automotive supply chains could eventually face growing pressure if tensions continue escalating. Canada increasingly looks determined to position itself not as America's economic extension, but as an independent global energy and industrial power. And for the automotive sector specifically, this could create ripple effects throughout North America's deeply integrated manufacturing ecosystem, especially across Ontario, Michigan, and major supplier corridors tied to cross-border vehicle production. Which brings us to the bigger picture, and why many analysts believe this situation could permanently reshape the future of North American trade. Verdict: the alliance showing serious strain. The biggest lesson from this situation is how quickly economic relationships can begin shifting once consumer behavior, trade routes, and political trust start changing simultaneously. Washington may have assumed its influence over North American trade was permanent, but Canada's response is revealing how rapidly leverage can evolve when energy markets and public sentiment move in a different direction. And once supply chains and export networks begin restructuring, reversing those trends becomes extremely difficult. What started as tariffs and retaliatory pressure is now evolving into something much broader, involving energy independence, industrial diversification, and geopolitical realignment. So now we want to hear from you. Do you think Canada will successfully reduce dependence on the United States? Could these tensions eventually damage North America's automotive industry long-term? And has Washington underestimated how powerful consumer-driven boycotts can become? Please share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We always enjoy hearing your perspective here on Piston Pundit. Subscribe to Piston Pundit to stay updated on the latest vehicle news, trade shifts, and automotive industry developments. Thanks for watching. You can now check out any of the videos on your screen. There's plenty more to explore.